Hi, everyone, and welcome. It's 1:05, so I'm going to get us started. It's really wonderful to see all the names popping up in the chat. So happy to have all of you here with us for this conversation that we have been looking forward to for a long time. And I'm very excited for our panelists to be here. So to start with, I want to acknowledge the grief that we're all sitting with, still from Buffalo, and then even as we were still trying to catch our collective breath from that, Uvalde happened, and we are still reeling. And our hearts are with our fellow educators, families, community members, all of those who are just carrying this grief. And we are really hoping that today, in today's conversation, we can just think together and imagine together what a brighter future might look like. And so we're really looking forward to engaging with all of you. And I am thrilled to have our panelists here joining us. So thank you for, as you're already doing, sharing your name, organization, and so forth in the chat. But I'm going to invite my colleagues, my panelists to introduce themselves, and they are going to share their name and organization and the different hats that they wear in early childhood education. So we're going to start with Alicia Lanier. Please introduce yourself, Alicia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ellicia Lanier, and I am the founder and executive director of Urban Sprouts Child Development Center here in St. Louis, Missouri, where we serve 124 children through a equitable social justice lens. And I also play a dual role as the vice chair of the Gateway Early Childhood Alliance here in St. Louis as well.
Dianna.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Dianna Lumanji. I am a campaign director at MomsRising, Mamás con Poder. We are a national organization that fights to ensure that all families have economic security. We fight against discrimination and we want to ensure that our country is one where all families can thrive. I am based in New York City. I lead the parent engagement work at MomsRising and in the early learning team at MomsRising. And I'm also a mom of 2 public school kids here in New York City.
Thanks, Dianna. And Soyoung.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you all. My name is Soyoung Park, and I'm faculty in early childhood special education at Bank Street College. Currently, my biggest role is as an educator working primarily with pre-service and in-service teachers, but my roots are as a special education teacher working with young immigrant children with disabilities and their families, and that's what my research is mostly focused on. I'm also a researcher, writer, and consultant in the field. But for me, most importantly, I care about early childhood as an auntie or an imo, as we say in Korean, and also as an expectant adoptive mother. So those are all my early childhood hats.
That's great. Thank you all so much for introducing yourself. I'll introduce myself as well. I'm Fabien Dufault. I am here at NYU as a professor of early childhood and urban education and also the executive director of the NYU Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools. My early childhood hats are as an early childhood educator of teachers of of early childhood education. I also, long ago was an early childhood teacher. My favorites was the threes room. And my children are now quite grown. They are 14 and 17, but for many years, for more than 7 years, we actually hosted a group family daycare in our apartment. So I miss all those little ones around the house, but It's also really lovely also, of course, to have young people at this stage of their development. But we are here to talk about our youngest ones. And, I think as we've talked about just already, being committed to their growth and to a bright future for all children and families. So I'm going to pose questions to our panelists, and each panelist is going to answer each question in a particular order. So I'll just kind of guide that along, call that out. So the first question is going to start with you, Soyoung, and it is, in all of the hats you wear, when have you felt most powerful as an advocate for your vision of quality?
Great, thanks for that question, Fabienne. So for me as a teacher, educator, and researcher, I get to speak to large groups of folks and publish papers on my vision. But for me, really where I feel the most powerful is when I'm in partnership with teachers in classrooms in the field, seeing transformation happening on the ground. And I really believe that that kind of transformation can only happen in relationship, when we have a genuine, trusting relationship of each other. So I'm very wary of that more colonizing approach of coming in with a tool and just measuring for a couple hours and then leaving. And if I can share a really quick story, I was working with an inclusive UPK teacher, and we had built relationship for about a year at that point and had a lot of mutual trust. And all of it was around how do we transform her practice to be more child-centered, which was an important goal of hers. But about midway through our work together, she had one of those big, large-scale evaluations coming up, and she just was so anxious about it. And her practice started to deteriorate. She was so nervous that it affected her. It affected her interactions with her children. The children's behavior started to change. And honestly, it compromised the quality of her work. But because we had that relationship already, we could step back together and just reground ourselves. And what was important to her? What did she value? What did she see as quality early childhood? And that was to have inquiry-based learning for her kids. And so she went back to her roots, really paid attention to the interests of the children, planned this beautiful water study exploration with her kids. And I thought it was very high quality. The classroom environment shifted, the children shifted because they were so engaged. But that could only happen, that kind of transformation could only happen because we were in relationship with each other. If I had gone in and said, you need to change this, you need to change this, that would not have worked ever. And so I really believe that it's through relationships that I've been able to have the most powerful impact on sharing my vision of quality.
I love that. Thanks so much, Soyoung. How about for you, Alicia? In all of your hats, when do you feel most powerful?
Soyoung, I think you're spot on. And this conversation, of course, is rooted in relationships with young children and so many people who are connected to the field. But I'd say where I feel most powerful is being a parent. I'm a mom of 7. And that role has led me to many pathways in my current work, being able to see what quality looks like from a parent lens and ensure that the parent voices are being heard and in concert with what's happening in the field. In addition to working with parents, of course, all the voices of the school are important, from the children to the educators, the parents, and the community, and bringing us together in a chorus-like manner and not solo acts is a way that we're able to get things done and see radical change within our community.
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much for that. Dianna?
So I'm going to echo what Alicia just said. I think I felt the most powerful as a parent in communication with my preschool director, with the teachers that were taking care of my kids when they were in that space, because they're a little older now, they're 5 and 11. But just constant communication with the educators, constant feedback, right? Hearing from your kids and hearing from the teachers and just it being constant. But now that they're older also, with the principals, right? So I think that as a parent, that constant communication is important with educators, and it has to be a two-way street, and the children's voices also have to be included. But definitely as a parent is the short answer, where I feel most powerful.
That's great. And as a scholar of family school relationships, that's really exactly what we want to hear, right? That's exactly what we want the parents and families to sit, is really feeling like they are most powerful when they are in relationship with the educators that are on the same team as they are, right? Really kind of nurturing these young people. Okay, so for our second question, Alicia, we're going to start with you. And the question is, this is sort of the heart of the conversation, right? Whose voices should matter most in developing a vision of quality in early childhood care and education? Where do you see gaps, and how can we address them?
Oh, you see my eyes just lit up, because of course, who are we centering? Our children. Our children are telling us from the moment that they're conceived what their needs are. We're starting to learn a little bit about their temperament in utero. We just have so much information if we just slow down and pay attention to the cues of the children. So the voices of the children are what matter. Where I see the gaps is that as a nation, we have so much work to do to center children's voices, to make our programs all about them, all about their interests, all about their needs and desires and their development for the moment, to make sure that quality looks like responsive caregiving, that there are always people available to watch their cues and follow them, and to build this richness of possibility around them. So of course, I would champion the children's voices, but we also need the voices of the providers to be heard, right? And that, as they're listening to the children and they're following their lead, this sort of investment is so rich that it takes the right people. So having the right providers in place and having them use their voices and encouraging them to not just be the daycare lady, right, but to really immerse themselves in what's happening around them, in the child and the family, in the advocacy roles, and give providers this sort of pedestal to be the champions that they are, and they've sort of been overlooked for many years. So that's my take.
Thanks. I'm really curious to hear what you think about this, Dianna.
Well, I love everything Alicia just said. Yes, our kids, yes, our providers. She's absolutely right that a lot of times they are often overlooked, when really they are the partners, with parents. They become our partners in helping us through the early years. I would add, I wouldn't say the most important, but I would want to present something that I often think about, which is it has been so helpful to me as a parent to have the guidance, kind of that early childhood development expert that can explain to providers and to parents what's happening in our children's brains. That, I've done a lot of work with one of these experts on like the brain development. Why is my kid hitting? Why, and we talk about, they're misbehaving, but then we realize that they're not misbehaving. It's developmentally appropriate, right? So I really think that those voices, that kind of expertise about why our children are doing this and that, and why they may be hitting, or taking a toy away, there's a reason behind it in the brain development. And I think that voice is also important, in addition to the parents and in addition to centering the child care providers and our little ones, who will tell us when something feels good and when they're learning and when they're having fun. And they're having fun and they're learning when they're having fun, right? So that's what I would add to the piece that Alicia just mentioned. Thanks for that. And I am going to come back to both of you actually around this, and maybe to Soyoung too. We'll see what what Soyoung's answer is. But I am interested in hearing. I'm going to talk. I want to hear more about sort of, I think probably not in this group of people who are on this panel, but I do sometimes hear hesitation among people around what it means to follow children's lead. And so I just really want to kind of unpack that with you all. Like, what does that actually look like and mean? Because I think sometimes it can feel to people like, but the adults should be in charge. So I just want to
want to get into that a little bit. But Soyoung, what about you?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Dianna and Alicia as well. And I was going to start with children too. But I personally really care a lot about the communities that we often don't turn to and don't look to ask them what they think of as quality. So I mentioned earlier that I work with young children with disabilities who are from immigrant backgrounds and their families, and that's a community that we often don't turn to and tap into. If we see a child who is engaging in a behavior or communicating in a way that feels different to us, the default is to have a deficit lens of that child and not see them as having a valuable voice that is also telling us what they need in terms of quality. So that to me is a major gap. And also engaging with disability justice communities and other justice communities that can tell us a lot about what our schools are failing to do in terms of sustaining the cultures, the knowledges, the strengths and assets of children who are often pushed to the sides in our school. So I'll just add that to this conversation as well.
Yes, I do. I really appreciate that. And actually, it might be connected, but another question that I get a lot when I talk about like whose voices should be heard and talking about communities and young people is what if what the community wants and thinks of as quality is contrary to what, let's say, developmentally appropriate practice says, or to the sort of like accepted standard models that we have? What are your thoughts about when those things clash? And then I guess I can even, similarly say, what, following the lead of young people, of children, right? What if following children's lead means doing things that seem counterintuitive or things that seem to really kind of contradict what we have been taught for many years about what are, the right ways and so forth? I would love to actually hear from all of you about that.
Well, as a woman of color, I often show up to these ideal learning spaces feeling very alone. And I think there's a lot of sort of teaching that, not teaching, but learning from both the research lens and sort of the cultural lens, and figuring out how do we strike a balance for good schools and what does that look like for that community. Bringing the Reggio approach to an urban neighborhood can be a little daunting for some of my parents, because it's like, wait, we're giving kids the power. I can't just tell them no. They're going to come home and ask a million questions, and they don't have boundaries, but they do, right? So we do it within a framework. But that framework is built on trust, and that building this sort of empathy and dance with the children, that it's built on negotiation, that it gives them power and that we can share power. And sometimes in communities that have been oppressed, we see that come up in our parenting and our teaching as well. And so I think there's a lot of healing and sharing that needs to happen amongst all of us, both from the theoretical lens and just that cultural, like, hey, what's needed for my folks, and how do we make that happen?
I can follow up because I thought something similar. I am Latina, and so sometimes when I speak to my parents about something in the way we're parenting, or something we're doing in pre-K class with my daughter, they get that same reaction, like, wait, the kids are deciding, or wait, what's happening, which can be culturally shocking to many of certain immigrant communities, for example. And I think that you can strike a balance between understanding where they're coming from, right, what their cultural background is, and also presenting the information, right? Like, this is why Reggio Emilia is wonderful, right? Kind of that parent engagement and parent education piece. And again, that constant communication with the educators, right? Like, parents, this is what Reggio is. And I'm just using Reggio because number one, I love it. And number two, you just mentioned it, Alicia. But, inviting parents to the classroom to, show them this is what the kid, and like you said, it's a framework, right? It's not like we're letting the kids just decide. there's a framework with the children's input, right? And the educators are listening to the children, and it's a conversation. It's not a top down. It's like, let's talk. And like you said, I think you said power sharing. Is that what you said? I don't remember, Alicia, but yeah, I do think that there's a communication piece and you know, learning from each other.
Yeah, I echo everything. And I do feel like at the end, I come back to relationships again, and that if you're in relationships and really listening, I think some of those things that feel really different are actually not as different as we believe they are. That usually we have similar goals and interests for children. They're just framed really differently from each other. And a lot of my work focuses on play. And I think about if my immigrant parents had seen me doing the kinds of things in a preschool classroom that I hope to see, they would be like, what is happening? This is not learning at all. But if you actually paused and listened to my family and listened to their values and interests, it's actually quite similar to what was going on in the classroom of cultivating community, cultivating independence, and all of those things. So I just go back to relationships again.
Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. And I think from that first conversation about trust too, that, you know, as part of that relationship, when there is that trust established, then it can be a conversation, right, around what makes sense and what feels right. So I really like the way that all of you were talking about this. Okay, here's our third question. And Dianna, we're going to start with you. So can you please share some bright spots that you know of or that you've been involved in, moments or models when power and voice were most centered in communities?
Sure. So I'll share an example of when my little one was in pre-K or I think it was kindergarten. He's now 11, so a while has passed, but it's an interesting, you know, experience. I remember that I felt that it was so academic. And I remember thinking to myself, UPK was so amazing and it was so play-based, and, you know, I loved it, and he was so happy and engaged. And now there's a lot of like writing and a lot of like worksheets, and I kind of hate it. And I was kind of, you know, and again, there was a communication. The parents were not thrilled about the worksheets, a lot of them. And we had a communication with our principal, and we said, you know, we think there needs to be more play. Why can't it be more like pre-K? You know, our kids were happy. Our kids were not as fidgety, and, you know, and there was a conversation, and it changed. And now in that school, I think they have 2 recess periods per kindergarten, and there's a lot more project-based, a lot more art-based. So they're still learning their ABCs, but it's not like worksheets and, you know, stuff where you expect kids to sit down. Like, what 4- and 5-year-old wants to sit down for like blocks of time, right? So parents really kind of listened and got the feedback from their kids, and even with our teachers. Like, we had conversations with our teachers about what they saw was working, what was not working, and really we talked to the principal as well. And now I'm happy to report that, you know, our kindergarten resembles a lot more to the pre-K model, which I think in New York City is a great model. It's highly play-based, and, you know, outdoor play and things like that, which our kids still need at kindergarten, right? Kindergarten doesn't have to become the new first grade, or, you know. So I'll stop there, but that is, I'm really excited. My daughter's going to a kindergarten with that new model.
That's great. That's a great example. Thanks, Dianna. Soyoung, how about you? What are some bright spots for you?
Well, I get to see and work with lots of different programs and centers. And I think I love your story, Dianna, because what I've seen is really at the heart of difference is when leadership really listens, and leadership is supportive and wants to listen to families, listen to teachers, listen to children, all of that. So I do think the leaders of the program and center are really critical. And I also feel that the voices of the community are centered more when that capacities-based lens is applied. And so when teachers are looking at their children with curiosity, not pathologizing the children, not pathologizing the family, but wanting to learn more about what they're showing or what they're doing, then we have lots of opportunities to hear from the voices of the children and the communities to unearth some of the why behind some of the behaviors that we're seeing that can help us to just continue to advance those high quality moments. So those are when I see lots of bright spots, is when I see both the capacities-based lens being applied and also a supportive leadership.
Great, thanks. Alicia?
Wow, how do I answer that? You all did an amazing job. I think, so I play two roles. One is a center leader and also a local leader here in St. Louis, organizing around a reimagined early childhood system. And so I would first say that from the center lens, where I see the bright spots, or where voice and power are centered, is when teachers have opportunities to collaborate with children and with parents, and that we're not separating all of those buckets and then we're bringing them together. The more opportunities we have, to piggyback on Soyoung and Dianna, to listen to each other, the better. And I think on a broader lens, here locally, we have organized around what does quality look like and how will we get there. And over the last 2 years, we have organized over 2,000 stakeholders to write a playbook for our early childhood system. And we're taking bits and pieces of that and continuing to bring voices back to the table to inform our next steps. So that radical listening, but then actually when we listen, so we do a lot of listening, and that, it's great, but what do we do after that? It's the action, right? It's what action steps are we taking, and what things can we do to make people feel their power happening, right? So sometimes, when we get in this system level work, we get caught up in, compromising good for great. So we have to take those small wins and figure out how can we impact this huge, system one piece at a time. So just centering folks, period, and gathering them and making sure that we have a voice, and that all voices that are involved in the system feel valued and heard, and fired up to make change.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And just listening to you, maybe think about what happens when there are such big breaches of that kind of trust and of that kind of collaboration. And I think, I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of these on all of our minds, and I feel like that's such an example of a big breach of trust that happened. And I just wonder if you all have any thoughts around, because of course we know that this is all about power sharing, right? Thinking about like who gets to decide what quality is, who gets to define it, and then who gets to take the actions around it. Alicia, I would love to hear more even about that example that you shared, like bringing all these voices together, like who are all the players? Is it at the state level? Is it, in your city or whatever? I'd love to hear more about that. But also just kind of to talk about, in these moments when there has been a breach, how do we recover?
I don't know that we do, honestly. I don't know that recovery is, there have been some real things that have breached trust among people for ages. And, but I can say I took a long pause and I see my colleagues have, what we can do is sit with it and figure out how to be with each other and to keep working on a system that, affects us all, right? Like there are, even when things don't happen to us, we're affected by them. And continue to figure out how those relationships can help with the healing and help with moving forward and be in the moment. A lot of times we just need to stay there and deal with where we are. And it's okay. I think, we tend to just, what's next? How do we move forward? But can we wrestle? Am I still wrestling over some of the things that have happened to us in the past? Yes. And so even if we're not directly affected, our generations will be affected. So I don't know that I'm looking for recovery, but how can we be with people and use those relationships to just be?
I appreciate that so much, Alicia, and I appreciate you modeling pausing and sitting, because these are not easy questions with sort of, easy answers and resolutions. And so, yeah, I really, really appreciate that. Yeah.
I'm thinking about a parent that I've worked with whose child has Down syndrome, and the kind of behavioral control and hurt that was committed against her child was just so painful for this parent. And this issue of quality, inclusive classroom kept coming up. And how do we maintain this child in order to keep a high quality inclusion classroom? And it did get to a point where this parent could not be in the school anymore without a lot of triggers happening. And this particular family needed a reset. They just needed to go somewhere else, build trust somewhere else, because it was just too painful. And I think that does happen at a lot of times. But even with the reset, it affords an opportunity to pause, step back, and reflect and think about what went wrong. Why did this break down? And I think oftentimes there's something that we had within ourselves that we couldn't let go of, that made it really hard to build that trusting relationship and to listen authentically. And when I think about quality, that's a lot of it. Is there's something that we can't let go of that makes it impossible for us to engage with somebody else's idea of what quality is. So that's just coming to mind as I think about Alicia's response.
Yes, 100%. Absolutely. Thanks so much. Dianna, did you want to add anything, or we could move to Q&A?
One of the things I wanted to kind of touch on is that I think the three of us have spoken a lot about, relationships and talking to the providers and the parents, having that relationship and listening to the children. And I think a lot of the times where parents kind of feel lost is that on the ground, in the classroom, in the childcare center, right? In the preschool center, we know what works. We know what doesn't work. We know what works for our kids. We know what teachers are saying. And now I'm going to speak only with my New York City public school parent hat on, right? As parents, sometimes we feel like then there's a disconnect, right? And someone is making decisions about the classroom and our kids in some building downtown. And we feel like we have no voice over that, right? So a lot of times our principals are on board. They really listen to us. The administration really listens to us. But then we're like, you know, we hear something happens or there's a rule that has been decided and parents are just like, why? We don't understand. We weren't consulted. We don't think this works for our families. And in the school community, that's what you hear. You hear why we weren't consulted. We don't think this is going to work. This is going to hurt our kids. And I think that's where a lot of the breakdown happens. That on the ground in the, you know, in those classrooms with those relationships, it's happening. And then, you know, where do we go from there? So I think that that is something that we need to work on. And I'll only say as a like public school parent, right? It's really hard to remain engaged at the level and to be heard at that level once your children leave those smaller preschool places and go on. You know, you can join the PTA, you can join the school leadership team, you can have principals that are supportive, but at some point there's a higher level that parents, I think, again, with my parent hat on, we feel like we're not being heard. And I want to name that because I think it's important, because I feel like with pandemic, we've also seen that, heard that from teachers as well, right? They're not being heard.
Yes, I think that was so important to name, Diana. Thank you. And it reminded me actually that I wanted to hear more about what Alicia was sharing, because it sounded like maybe what you all are doing is trying to bridge that a little bit.
We are. I mean, this just makes me think about, you know, the pandemic and how we didn't realize just how siloed parents, children, caregiver, government was until we all needed each other, right? And so in the beginning, everybody's freaking out. No one's listening. Somebody's listening to the CDC. I don't know. It's so many acronyms. You know, like we were all frantic. We're trying to listen to research, the news, our hearts, the children, the parents. And so it just sent us like fluttering, and it brings us back to this place of there has to be some, you know, efforts amongst us in these systematic roles to start blending these conversations in a way that we've not done before. Really centering folks of color is going to be important. And making spaces available that are with us, not for us. And really finding out how do we give the decision-making power to the people who are most impacted by these systems. And so I'm just thinking through, like at our school, you know, a couple of weeks ago, we had teachers out with like posters helping the community understand that like we don't get paid enough. And then they're going to county council meetings, the teachers, the providers are going, the parents are going, because the county council can listen to me and some of our other local leaders, right, who we've deemed that this is the organization for advocacy. But all those things really start happening even at a very young age, right? If we started giving voice to children early, these discomforts that we have in our nation with transformative thinking, meaning transfer of power, can sort of be dismantled. And we're kind of tearing down some walls here lately. And some folks are inviting of that work. And then there's these challenges that Soyoung talked about, where you know, there, I'm sorry, it may not be, Fabienne, you talked about like what happens when that doesn't work. And so we have to do some more relationship building and more educating of where we are. I'm thinking about the special rights work that Soyoung starts talking about. Our country is still saying disability, like you're not able. And that's just where we are. But in our lens, we look at it as special rights. Is, you know, how do we look at where children are? How do we, you know, give them what they need early so that we can see a different person years down the road, right? Again, centering children. So we've got to find one single thing to wrap around, and that needs to be children's voices, everyone. You know, there are whole countries that are doing this, and they've seen so much change in not just, you know, all these feel good, trusting relationships I saw in the comments, but actual change in their communities regarding crime, regarding tragedy, regarding health, regarding mental health, regarding their unemployment, right? All of this stuff is interconnected, and we need to figure out how. And it really starts at the beginning of life. We just wait too long for every dang on thing. You know, I'm somebody's auntie, so I might, you know, that's who I am in the community. We wait too long. We start getting, you know, serious in kindergarten. No, we can join forces a lot early. And I just think that if we start making this ripple effect across the nation, saying, hey, this is where we need to put our efforts and our energy, we're going to get somewhere in my lifetime for sure.
Well, I believe it with the three of you doing the work that you're doing. I absolutely believe that we're going to get there. Thank you so, so much. This is awesome. So we do have some questions in the Q&A, and you don't all three have to answer them, right? So whoever just kind of feels led. So the first one is, can we be culturally inviting by focusing on building healthy development with a growth mindset approach in any pedagogy? I think this might be a question about growth mindset itself. But yeah, I'm curious about whoever wants to jump in. Can we be culturally inviting by focusing on building healthy development with a growth mindset approach in any pedagogy?
I'm wondering if the question is asking about kind of regardless of the pedagogical approach. Okay. Yeah, I think that, you know, the growth mindset research has been really interesting, and the work around that has been so important for ensuring that we're supporting children to see that they have capacities within themselves, and continuing to encourage that all along. I think that some of what's important, though, is not, from my perspective anyway, not replacing the language of the communities with researcher language. And so really being able to say, you know, what do you value? What are your beliefs? What are the things that matter to your community in terms of the kinds of dispositions that you want to cultivate in a child? And they might not use the language growth mindset. It could be really similar. And so I personally am wary of a lot of the buzz terms that come mostly from white researchers who are using a lot of empirical tools to try to advance it and don't actually come from the community themselves, is what I would say.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Soyoung, that is so true. And so much of the pedagogy that is available, and that's even approved curriculum. Because again, what did you say? Like we're, I think Dianna said it, that we're disconnected from the building downtown. So there are curriculums that are approved by our government in our state. And they're very European and don't really have that cultural lens. And so finding something that we can use that welcomes where people are is key and important to our community, so that we're not we don't want to keep harming. You know, it's just like, I can go on and on. So I'll go to mute.
No, but yeah, I hear you. Thank you both. Here's our next question. I agree that relationships are the heart of quality in early childhood care and education, but I also worry that we're putting a lot of emotional labor on teachers for very low pay. How do we account for that when thinking about using relationship as the basis for building quality? Love this question.
I can start, if you don't mind, only because I feel like I've been talking about this, you know, pay situation that we have in early childhood, right? I think for a really long time, we've thought of this type of work as free labor that at some point generations ago, women of color, Black women, right, they took care of our kids, and that's one thing. So culturally, I think we don't place the value of this labor the way we should, right? One of the stats I love sharing when I talk to people about all this stuff is that our babies' brains are developing the fastest from ages 0 to 3. So why are we waiting to like pre-K or kindergarten, right? We should be investing in the education and the care that our kids are getting from the time they're born to the time that they're going to these childcare centers. And that the people that take care of our kids should be making living wages. And it is really hard. So how do we account for that? You know, I think so now with my parent hat on, and I also do this for work, right? So just as parents, we need to be partners and kind of raise our voices. Right now, there's a lot of work in a lot of cities and states. I was just at a rally this morning for childcare in New York City, but we need to continue saying, you know, we need to stand up basically with our early care educators and say, we as parents value them. They are partners in helping us educate and care for our kids. And, you know, and we need to stand up for them. And, you know, that's like on a bigger, right? Bigger, call your legislator, tell them that this is on your mind, that this is important. Bring up the fact that they're not being paid what they should be being paid, right? The people that take care of our kids should not be making poverty wages. And I'm going to stop and just say on an everyday, right? Just tell your teachers and your educators that you like, just check in. Like as simple as that sounds, like from a parent perspective, sometimes we don't even think about like, how are you? Everything is so heavy right now, right? Or just like, I appreciate that. Thank you for taking care of my baby. You know, here's an iced coffee. I don't know, but just say I appreciate you, because really as parents, they are partners in us in taking care of our babies.
Yes, thanks, Diana. I love that you talked about it both in terms of that as human beings, we do need that connection, and we need to be in the streets, we need to be marching, we need to be activating. And I actually think that you've answered another question in the chat from Sunny McDevitt, who is at St. John's, asking about sort of like, what are some actions that we can take to ensure as a field that we have equity and high quality for our educators as well, you know, as we've talked about, who are mostly women and women of color. So how do we do that? So I really appreciate that. And it's both, right? We don't lose our humanity. We don't let go of the relationships. We value the relationships, we hold them up, and we activate, right? We take action. So I love that. Okay, next question. How do you push back when researchers or policymakers insist that quality is measured with numbers and tools designed by experts? Yep, these are amazing questions, y'all.
Can I just really quickly comment on the question before that we're talking about Black women, because I happen to have something to say about that. I think that across the country, we have to create platforms for Black women to demand what we've never demanded before. How can we have a whole workforce full of Black women? Workforce is led by Black women that are undereducated, and we've not created systems for them to be educated on what the researchers are saying should happen. So we know that that's rooted in racism, right? And so I just wanted to at least answer his question, and I'd be happy to share more directly, Sunny, any information we can through the Alliance, but we've got links to the We Power Playbook and some other things. And we've just flat out been sending demand letters as Black women who care for your children in St. Louis. And we just call it out, right? Because we have to give the Black women in those communities the power and the voice and the space to speak for themselves.
Yes, 100%. Thanks. And Ellen just put the chat for the We Power Playbook, just put the link for the We Power Playbook in the chat. And actually, Alicia, what you said as echoing what Martine just commented in the chat. So I'm just loving how we're all sort of connecting here. So we have 6 minutes left. So I will just say, let's get to the last 2 questions. We have 2 more. So the one is about the pushback. How do you push back, right, on these ideas of like measures and experts? What have been some strategies that you've used to do that?
I think one thing that's really critical is that there's actually a lot of good research and scholarship out there that is not using these kind of more colonial approaches to measuring quality. And we don't spotlight that enough. We don't value it to the same level. So there's a little bit of a decolonizing of our minds that needs to happen, where we don't think that numbers somehow are more important than voices and stories and people sharing about their lived experiences. And that's hard. If you're pushing back on somebody who that's all that they do is the measurement and the numbers, they might not be able to see that. But there is actually a body of work that looks at quality really, really differently that I think we need to center more.
Yes, absolutely. And if you have any examples, Soyoung, that you could drop in the chat, even if it's just one of your amazing articles that you can share with us, that would be fantastic. Okay, and then the last question in the Q&A is, Alicia, I loved how you said how oppression can take shape in our parenting and our teaching. Can you say more about how and where you've seen that and how you move through relationships with parents and teachers with that knowledge?
Oh, oh my God, it's just like every day. I mean, I have so many examples, but I think since we're talking about ideal learning and quality, this curriculum, the Reggio approach, to me was like the only option out there on the approved curriculum. It was the only approach that I could find that centered folks' voices. And it's caused all of us to slow down and to respect where we are in our understanding and to challenge each other on our narrative and what's next for children. And so the example that I'm thinking about is as children enter our school system at the school, and we are, we have our first curriculum night where we talk to parents, and they are looking for, this robust curriculum, which I know that my teachers offer, but they're looking for it in a very Americanized, this is what it should be way. Like daycare should be ABCs, and there should be all these number and letter charts, where really the environment is set up so loose, and with materials that can speak to the children and give the children the opportunity to tell us what their thoughts are. We've had to do a lot of work with parents on that, right? Like helping them to see where their children are, and also empowering them to follow their own children. Because I think as a parent, you want to have it all right, but a lot of it is about our control of how do we make sure we have this good child. So we work a lot on communicating with parents what children's capabilities are, and just how incredible they are from the moment they come here, and how they have so much potential. And so it's a dance, and there has to be lots of communication. I mean, our children get daily communication on what they're doing. And we have a pedagogical person, and we have an artillerista who works with us on documentation. So it's a lot. But it is rooted again in those relationships, radical listening, and communication. And we have a lot of work to do still, because as new waves of parents come in, we have to dismantle that thought mindset that adults don't have the same amount of power as children. We have very little power in our school, and we need that, right? But there's still educators that we're working on 10 years later to kind of say, hey, it's okay, they can do that. Or, so it's a constant dance around how to not allow these oppressive systems to sort of lock us out of what's possible, and do lots and lots of talking with each other to give children their rights back. It's all about rights. It's all about rights. When do we give children their rights? The time they're born.
Wow, thank you so much. Do we have any burning last comments, Soyoung or Dianna? Okay, well, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so very much to our audience for spending this hour with us. I have learned so much. I am feeling energized and already feeling better, even at this, alongside the pain that I'm holding, I'm also holding the hope. And I just really am grateful for community, for the ability to do that, right? That's what community allows us to do. It allows us to hold all of our feelings side by side and to just be with each other. So thank you so much for this phenomenal conversation. Thank you, all of you, for being so active in the chat and in the Q&A. It has just been really a real honor for me today to be here with all of you. So thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week. If you want to unmute and say bye, panelists, feel free. And thanks to the Trust for Learning also for partnering with us at Metro Center for this. Ellen, I don't know if you want to show yourself and say hi from Trust for Learning. Thank you so much for
just waving and saying thank you.
Thank you so much.